Hey everyone, hope you're well. It's been a minute since I have posted a video on this YouTube channel, but I'm back today with a new tutorial. And today I want to talk about how to integrate a Node Express backend with bubble.io. We're going to start with a really simple example in this video just to learn how something like this could work. And in a future video, we'll look at a more practical use case of why you might want to do something like this. And that, I think, is really the first question to address is why would you want to do something like this? If every Bubble app comes with a database, comes with backend workflows, essentially everything that you need to build a functioning web application, why would you want to stand up a separate server-side app using something like Node.js? And the answer, in my opinion, is that I think Bubble is really great at some things, but it's really bad at other things. One of those things where I think Bubble struggles is, generally speaking, when you have some data and you want to manipulate that data, run some calculations on it for whatever reason it is. If you have just a lot of data and you want to do things to that data and then kind of feed it back into Bubble in some way, Bubble itself is not great at that. And so I think as no-code developers, this was certainly the case for me, is when I was learning Bubble, I would often look at every problem through this lens that I had as a Bubble developer. And so there's that famous quote that's overused, but I'll use it here anyways, where if you only have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so I found that I would spend a ton of time trying to solve problems that were really huge problems because of some Bubble limitation. And the second I kind of expanded outside of Bubble and started venturing into these areas that we're going to talk about today, it was just a great tool to have in the toolbox. And it'll allow you to kind of look at problems from a different perspective. And sometimes something that could take, hours and hours to do and be really painful to do in Bubble can be super simple to do outside of Bubble. Okay. So just generally, having more tools in the toolbox, I think, is a great thing to do. And this is definitely, at least from my perspective, this has been one of the most valuable tools to have in my toolbox. If you're going to be following along, you'll need a few things installed on your computer. One of those, of course, is going to be Node.js. If you just do a simple Google search of Node.js and follow their installation guide, that should be everything that you need there. Ngrok is another tool that we're going to use. Ngrok will essentially create a tunnel between your local machine and the internet so that you can interact with your app that we're going to build that's running locally on your machine from within bubble.io using the API connector. And you'll need a code editor, of course. I'm going to be using Cursor. I really like Cursor. I've been using it for probably, 5 or 6 months now. And any code editor will do. If you want to use VS Code or whatever code editor you'd like, it'll do just fine. I like Cursor just because of all of the different AI features that they've integrated into their product. But anyways, quickly plugging my course here that I'm building. It's not ready yet, but in this video and in future videos about Node.js and kind of just extending Bubble's functionality, I'm not going to be diving too deep into the core concepts of building outside of Bubble, but that will be something that I'm going to do in this course that I'm building. So if you're interested in going deeper, make sure to join the waitlist. The link is in the description for this video. And I'm also available for coaching sessions. So if you'd like to work with me one-on-one, I'll include the link in the description there as well. And I can help you kind of deal with whatever development problems you're dealing with. So with that said, let's get into the tutorial. And yeah, hope you enjoy. Okay, let's get started. I have a brand new Bubble application. It is completely blank right now, but before we do anything in Bubble, what I'm going to do is open a terminal on my computer, and we're going to start writing some code. So I'm going to create a new repository where we're going to build this Node app. And to do that, first, I'm just going to go to the place where I build all of my dev projects. So for me, that's documents/dev. We'll change to that directory. And we're going to say, let's make a new directory called simple node server. And I'm going to open simple node server inside of Cursor. Now, if you just downloaded Cursor, this command probably won't work for you, but you can just open up the Cursor application and open whatever directory you just created. And you should see, like I'm seeing right now, whoops, not that. What you should see is, the reason I saw that is because I actually just opened everything in my dev folder, but we're going to change directory into simple node server. And now if I open this in Cursor, you're going to see that there's nothing in this directory yet. Okay, so let's open a terminal inside of Cursor. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm just going to initialize an empty project here, and this will create a package.json file. You can think of the package.json file as kind of like the main config file for your application inside of Node. And we're going to install a few things. So the first thing that we're going to install is Express. And to do that, I'm going to just say npm install Express. This is the most popular backend framework that's frequently used inside of Node for things like this. It just makes building kind of REST APIs a whole lot easier than just doing it in Node. But you can see that that was installed as a dependency here. And we also have these Node modules and this package lock.json that we don't need to talk about in this video. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file here. Let's just call this app.js. And we're going to use Cursor's fancy AI feature to build the entry point of our application. So I'm going to type Command K to open this little window here. This is my favorite part of Cursor. It's probably the main reason that I use it, even more so than there's this other feature. If I hold Command L, this is essentially just like kind of talking to ChatGPT. It is integrated with the code that you're writing here, and there's some cool features, but I mainly love Cursor for this like inline window that you can use to correct your code or write new code for you. In this case, what I'm going to tell this AI model, looks like we're using Claude here, is I'm going to say, I want to build a super simple Node Express app. Please help. Let's see what it comes up with. Okay. So there is the entry point of our application. It looks like we are accepting a GET request at the root of our application. That's what this line of code means here. And when someone sends a request to the root of our application, we're saying res.send. So we're sending a response that is hello world. Let's test this. I'm going to run this application by just going to the terminal here and saying node app.js. When I did that, this code ran, and you can see server is running on localhost 3000, which is coming right from this line of code here. And let's test this. If I just take this and go to a new browser window here and open this, you can see that there's that response, hello world, right? If I shut down my server, so in my terminal, I'm just going to hit, excuse me, I'm just going to hit Control C to stop the server. And let's change this. This is a simple node server. And let's actually change the location of this endpoint. So instead of the root of the application, let's say that test node server, that we want to return this response right here when someone sends a request to this endpoint. I'm going to start my server again. And now I don't need to copy this because I've already got it here actually. But if I refresh the page, we're going to get an error saying, hey, there's no endpoint set up to receive a request at this location at the root. But if I go to, what did I call it? Test node server. There we go. We can see that new response that we created. Okay, so far so good. One thing that I want to change here is it's really annoying inside of Node to stop and have to restart your server. If I make a change here, for example, hello, and I save this file, if I refresh this page, you can see that those changes aren't reflected on the page right here. in order to show those changes and to test, you have to kind of stop and restart your server, which is annoying. There's a great tool that we can use to solve that problem called NodeMon. So I'm just going to go ahead and install that. Let's get rid of this, and we'll say, I want to use NodeMon. Please help. Okay, so we'll run this command in our terminal. And we also need to add some scripts to our application, or sorry, to the package.json file. So I'm going to copy this. I could just click apply here and it would do the same thing. You can see that it's getting rid of that test script and adding these scripts in. So I'm going to hold command enter to accept. Looks like that didn't work for some reason. There we go. Okay. And now, because we've installed NodeMon, I can start my application by running the command npm run dev. There we go. Server is running on localhost 3000. And if I go to app.js and I change this back to hello world, you can see that that server gets restarted every time I save a change. So if I refresh the page, there we go. So that's handy to have, and will definitely make life less annoying when you're building building a Node app. Okay, so we have this very basic app set up, which is great. Let's go and try to send a request from Bubble to this application, return a response to Bubble, and see how that works. So I'm going to go to my Bubble application. We're going to go to the plugin page and install the API connector. I really wish Bubble would just give you this pre-installed with every app, but that's okay. A couple of clicks. And let's call this local server. We can, of course, call it whatever we want. We'll add a new API call here. Let's just say get response from server. Now, I can't just copy this URL and initialize this call because Bubble doesn't have access to my local machine. So if I initialize this call, you can see the localhost is not valid. So in order to be able to interact with this app that I have running on my local machine, we have to use a tool called ngrok, which will essentially create a tunnel between my local machine and the internet so that we can, using the API connector, send requests to this app that's running on my local machine and get some sort of response. So if you have ngrok installed, I'm going to stop my server here, and let's create a new terminal window actually. And we'll say ngrok http 3000. That's the port that my application is running on. So it's going to create a tunnel to that port. There we go. And now this is the URL that I can use inside of the API connector to send requests, and that's going to be kind of routed to this app running on my local machine. So let's start this server one more time. I'm going to copy this URL. And we're still going to send the request to this test node server endpoint, but instead of localhost, I'm just going to paste that base URL. And let's initialize the call. This API returns a non-object, and you pick JSON. Okay, so let's change the way that our server is responding because we're just sending a text response right now, I believe. So let's change this and say, I want to send a JSON response. res.json message hello world. So I'll accept that and save those changes. And if we go back to Bubble and reinitialize this call, there you go. That should look familiar if you've spent any time in the API connector. This is always a nice thing to see when you're initializing API calls. It means that we got a successful response, and that's exactly what we're returning from our server on the Node side, right? Okay, so far so good. Let's make this example a little bit more complex. And again, we're not, the purpose of this video is just to set up a simple integration between Bubble and this Node Express server that we've built. In a future video, we're going to look at a more practical use case of how you can use this setup to do some more complex things that Bubble really struggles with. But for now, what we'll do is I'm going to go to the index page. Let's just put a multi-line input on the page and a button. Send data to server. And I think as a simple example, what we'll do is we'll build a workflow where the user types whatever they're going to type into this multi-line input. When they click on this button that says send data to server, we'll send that string of text in here to our server. We'll receive the request, and what we'll do is we'll just look at that string, group every word together and count how many times that word appears in that string of text, and then return that response to Bubble. Okay, I don't know why you would need to do this. It's probably not a practical example, but it should give you, it should provide a nice example of how something like this can work, and then you can take it and run with it for whatever problem you're trying to solve. All right, so next step. Let's go back to our Node server here. And right now we can receive a GET request here, but if I go back to Bubble and I change this to a post, we're going to get an error here. And the reason is we're not set up on the Node side to receive a post request at that endpoint. So let's change this to, instead of receiving an app.get, instead of receiving a GET request, we'll change this to app.post. And let's change the name of this endpoint to, I don't know, let's say receive data from Bubble. Could probably pick shorter names for these endpoints, but that's okay. It'll work just fine. So let's change this endpoint name, and we've saved it so that we're receiving a post request. And if we initialize the call, we should see the exact same response here. Okay, on the Bubble side of things, let's go ahead and add in a JSON body so that we can pass that data to our server. So we'll create, let's just call this key content. This will be dynamic. And we'll uncheck that private box so that we can actually pass in a dynamic value. And we'll say hello from Bubble. Now, if I send this, we're still just going to see the exact same response here, but let's change this. First, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come inside of this function right here, and we'll say console.log rec.body. That's exactly what I wanted to type this. I have this autocorrector on, or I guess like a code completion tool that I'm using. And what this is going to do, this request object here, that's the request object that is being sent in this case from Bubble. So when we log the request body, that's the body portion of the request, the body key, and that will contain everything that we're sending right here. So let's reinitialize this call. We're still getting the same response, but if I go to my console, you can see, here we go, content, hello from Bubble. Great. And let's change this a little bit to say, I want to send a response. For now, let's just say, well, actually, let's dive in and actually do what we were going to do. So the request body is going to contain a key called content. This is a string. What I'd like to do is group every word together and count how many times that word appears in this string. I want the final response to be an array of objects. An array is what we would call a list in Bubble, but I want to return a list of objects. Each object should have two keys: word, the word, and count, how many times the word appears. I want the response array to be sorted so that the most frequent word appears at the top of the list. Let's see how Cursor does, or Claude, I guess, with that. So we're grabbing the content key from the request body. We are grouping the words together. And I think that should do what we want it to do. And then we're just sending that result back. So let's accept this and let's give it a try. And now when we initialize this call from Bubble, we should, in this case, there we go. We see this array of objects, the word hello from Bubble. And in this case, that makes sense. There's hello, from, and Bubble only appear once in this string. So far, so good. Okay. Let's go and make this a little bit more complicated on the Bubble end. So I'll put a repeating group here, and let's just expand this. I'm going to put a text in here, and let's deal with this repeating group first. So what I want to do is when I click on this button, we're going to send whatever data is, whatever text is inside of this multi-line input to our backend server via that API call that we set up. And then when we receive the response from our server, we're going to put that response inside of here. Okay, so let's say that the type of content here, if we scroll down, because we've initialized that call in the API connector, we can say that the response type, or sorry, the data, the type of content in this repeating group is going to be this get response from server. And we'll leave this blank right now because we'll deal with this inside of the workflow. So let's set up a workflow action here. And yes, I'm still using the old workflow UI because I just like it better at this point, but I will probably switch over soon. When button send data to server is clicked, what do we want to do? We want to, what did we call it? Get response from server, but we didn't change this to an action, so that's why we're not seeing it there inside of our workflow action options. There we go. Get response from server. The content that we're going to pass is going to be whatever is inside of multi-line input A. And when we get this response from the server, what we can do is, let's just say display list in a repeating group. And for the repeating group, the data source, because we've set the type of content already on the repeating group, we can say the result of step 1. And there we go. So Bubble recognizes that the result of step 1, which is the response coming from our server, is going to be a list of objects, right? Each object is going to have that word key as well as the count. And that's all we need. So inside of our repeating group, let's say that, let's do this. And we'll say current cells get response from servers word. And let's copy this one more time, and we'll say frequency. And we called it count, so we'll just display that. And let's make this a little easier to read. I don't know why I care about this for this simple example, but there are some things I just kind of, I'm definitely no designer either, but there are some things that I can't help myself with. We'll group this together. We'll give it a little bit of spacing, and then let's just put a bunch of, well, actually, let's just set a max width of, I don't know, 600 and center that and give it some top margin. Okay. So let's preview this and give it a try. And what we'll do is let's go to ChatGPT and we'll say, please write a short 300-word story about a boy who is just learning to use Node.js Express with Bubble. Ethan was an ambitious 16-year-old. Okay, very cool. So we'll give it a second here. And I'm guessing that the most frequently used word here is going to be like the or something, but we'll see. Let's see how it works. Copy that. Paste that in here, send data to server. Okay, what are we doing wrong? Get response from server just returned an error. I would guess what's probably happening here. Let's go to cursor, and we're getting invalid JSON. So I think what is probably happening here is we've got this quote, these quotation marks right here. So a good tip whenever you're doing something like this, if we go to edit workflow, we're going to send multi-line input A's value, but we're going to say format as JSON safe. And what that will do is it'll take this entire string, make sure that it's JSON safe. And if we just go to the API connector, what we can do is we can get rid of these quotation marks here, because that expression format as JSON safe is going to put quotation marks around the entire value that it is making JSON safe. So let's just do that one more time. And there we go. Like I predicted, the, his, and Ethan. Okay. So not the most useful application, but it looks like it's working. And obviously the goal of this was not to build something that just groups words together and tells you how frequently they appear. But hopefully this helps show how you can build something outside of Bubble, stand up a Node Express server on your own and pass data to it, do something with that data, return a response to Bubble. And yeah, in the next example, in the next video, I'm going to show you an example of something that I actually had to do using this setup that saved me a bunch of time and that wasn't possible to do inside of Bubble. So hope you found this helpful, and yeah, I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.